thank you all so much for being here at the USMCA at the Crossroads, What's Next for Texas and Trade panel. My name is Joshua Trevino. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. But really what I do on a day-to-day basis is focus on the U.S.-Mexico relationship, the Texas-Mexico relationship. I'll give you a little background just to myself, but more importantly to the panel and what we're going to discuss here. I am a native South Texan. My family's from Laredo and Corpus Christi, and like a lot of South Texans, my family has been in the region since about the 1750s. So it's very deep roots. Losing sight of the Texas Revolution, interestingly enough, but we're very grateful for how it turned out. And so we have that background. But one thing that I very, very distinctly remember as a kid, and I didn't grow up in South Texas. We were a military family, but when we would go back and when we would see it, particularly in the mid-1980s, I remember there was one trip to Laredo that we took, and our family home, which was built by hand by my great-grandfather, Tomás Hidrogo, and his wife, Concepcion Martinez, some of the finest people. My youngest son is named after Tomás, if that gives you any example of who he was. He was a taxi driver, a vegetable cart vendor who raised 13 children without a formal education in Laredo, Texas. And he built a house by hand at 2909 Juarez. If you're ever in downtown Laredo, I don't know what went wrong in your life, but if you're ever there, go to 2909 Juarez, and that house is there. And it's a symbol of work and pride and culture, I think, that persists and endures. But one thing that was always true about South Texas in particular, and especially when you get into the Rio Grande Valley, in Laredo and places like that, is that they were historic epicenters of poverty in the United States. And when you think about the most impoverished areas in the U.S., and it's poverty of a type that is functionally unknown elsewhere. It's Appalachia, it's the Mississippi Delta, and it's South Texas, to the point that in some places, and there are a handful that persist, but they're mostly gone now. You'd have these colonias that didn't even have running water, right? And so this characterized life in South Texas for years and years and years, generations under generations. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. That'll be a different panel we can talk about. But what I want to illuminate is that when NAFTA comes along in 1994, the great effect that it has on South Texas in particular, and especially its urban centers, its ports, Laredo, McAllen, Brownsville, Matamoros, and all these dual cities that exist along the Rio Grande, is that really for the first time we had a middle class. And I cannot overstate the transformative effect that brought to South Texas and those communities. And so it's with that lens that we're going to open up this conversation on what USMCA means for Texas in particular, what's coming next, why we're having the conversations that we have. I want to emphasize, and all the panelists here are going to have opinions, and they're going to be informed opinions and good opinions. This is the right mix of people to discuss this. But this panel is not structured as pro or anti-USMCA. It's not pro or anti-trade. It's not pro or anti-renegotiation, reauthorization, anything else, because this is a real live debate, not just in the American civic space writ large, but also on the right in general. It's a conversation that we absolutely must have because there are true first principles involved, and nowhere is that more true than here in Texas, which is the prime beneficiary and recipient of the effects of a trade regime with Mexico in particular. There is a third country involved in USMCA. I don't remember what it is, but there we go. Are you Canadian? You're not Canadian, are you? Oh, you're just cheering Canada. Okay. It's a country renowned for hockey, but since hockey is ours now, we're going to call it ice football. And it probably won't get discussed as much in this particular panel. So we're going to talk about USMCA, Texas, and trade. Let me introduce the panelists that we have, starting with our very respected Rep. Honorable Caroline Harris Davila. I have the pleasure of being one of her constituents. She's great. So if you live north, like a literal vote, actually, in this case. Representative Caroline Harris Davila proudly serves Texans in House District 52. Born and raised in Round Rock, Caroline is a lifelong Texan who understands and champions Texas values. She was GOP Freshman Legislator of the Year. I didn't know that. Yeah, congratulations. There you go. You're the second youngest, right?
I think so.
But first wisest.
Yeah.
Yes. The NFIB recognized her for scoring 100% on her voting record for supporting legislation that significantly helps small businesses. She holds a bachelor's degree in communications from Thomas Edison State College and a master's degree in public affairs from the LBJ School here at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you very much.
Okay, there's a few. Come on, guys.
There's a few. This is a zero Aggie panel. I made sure of it. So, Caroline, thank you for joining us very much. Also pleased to have here my America First Policy Institute colleague. I have 3 jobs, but in one of them, Jill Homan is just an incredibly valued and respected and eminent colleague. Jill is from Clayton, North Carolina. You know what? We've left out your. Oh no, here's your full title. She's Deputy Director, Trade and Economy Policy, and a campaign director, and a senior advisor to the president and CEO at AFPI. She's been punished with her success by more work. Native North Carolinian and has over a 2-decade career in private equity. She's focused on investing in low-income communities, including opportunity zones. Jill is recognized for her expertise in opportunity zones and has worked closely with legislative and administrative members to advocate for effective regulations and promote economic development in underserved areas like South Texas, actually. Yeah, so thank you for that. In addition, Jill's commitment to community development is evident in her own efforts to own, operate, and preserve quality workforce housing. Thank you very much for flying out here from Washington, D.C. to be with us.
Absolutely, and I'm going to hold a debate on barbecue.
Oh,
so
no.
I'm North Carolina barbecue, and so right in the back of the room, we'll talk about vinegar-based barbecue.
You know, as a lifelong Dallas Cowboys fan, I have to ask, why would you enter a contest you know you're going to lose? Yeah.
So, and just as you invited everybody to your home in Laredo, I wrote 2909, got it down. I'm inviting everybody to my home this summer for our barbecue, North Carolina barbecue. So if you find yourself in Eastern North Carolina, I welcome you.
I withdraw my critique. See you there. Last but absolutely not least, my good friend Larry Rubin. As an aside, our Mexico work at the foundation has a lot of friends that rest on the shoulders of giants. Some of them are in the audience right here. Alice Galvan, Humberto Lopez from Patria Unida. Larry also has been absolutely indispensable to the work we've done. So thank you. I'm always glad to see you. Saw you in Mexico City a few weeks ago. Larry is the president of the American Society of Mexico, working with business leaders and policymakers to strengthen cooperation between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Also the founder in Houston, this is somewhat newer, but you've told me a lot about it, of the Mexican American Society. Ask him about that after the panel. It's extremely interesting. It's a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to promoting stronger U.S.-Mexico ties while celebrating the contributions and dual heritage of the Mexican American community. Larry and I are the least likely Mexicans you'll ever meet, but that's us. He has been actively engaged in issues related to international trade, cross-border investment, supply chains, regional competitiveness, including USMCA, and his analysis on U.S.-Mexico relations, trade policy, and regional security has appeared in major international media outlets. He's an American with a bicultural perspective and a graduate of the executive MBA program at Rice. I don't think I knew that. But I should have known you were a Rice grad since you don't have any absurd collegiate slogans to yell out at public events. So well done on that. Look, let's get into the conversation here. And I think the first person I would like to toss this to actually is Jill. Talk to us about the national superstructure. What are the issues? We're going through a renegotiation, reauthorization process with the USMCA right now. Some people know it, a lot of people don't. There's a July 1st deadline. Can you give us the broad contours of that? Why this was built into USMCA to start with?
Yes, and I think I'd like to rewind a little bit further because and I'll just start off, like, these are my views, and I think as far as I'm concerned, we elected a negotiator-in-chief, and I have confidence that we're going to work towards an even stronger USMCA, and I look forward to seeing that play out. But if we were to rewind where we are into the early 90s, and I think I was there, and I can tell you, what music was there. But if we rewind and look at what was happening with NAFTA, and then we go from NAFTA to USMCA, what I would actually assert, and this is something that President Trump ran on, is that NAFTA, while it was a trade agreement, a trilateral trade agreement, it really was not producing the results that were putting the American worker first. And that was something that quite clearly the president ran on. And by way of example, there's several statistics, one of which is the U.S. Lost about 700,000 jobs during that NAFTA period between NAFTA and USMCA. Other data points to think about is while our trade as a tri-party region actually grew, it grew to upwards of $1 trillion. And so what you found is like the trade grew by a multiple of 5. So it was a 5x trade growing from, NAFTA to the point of starting USMCA. But what you had, when you look inside and you look at actually the goods deficit, the trade goods deficit that the U.S. is carrying, it actually grew by 68, so 68 times. And so the point is that you had a trade agreement with NAFTA that was really lacking the critical infrastructure that was needed in terms of wage floors, in terms of really enforcement with teeth. So what you have with NAFTA is while it got the 3 countries together for a tri-party trade agreement, you're lacking the critical pieces that can put the American worker first. So I think as we look at the renewal, I think the president negotiated a very solid deal with USMCA. Critical in that deal was this renewal provision, which is a one-of-a-kind provision, which means that we don't need to completely renegotiate the whole agreement, that we have an ability to review it every 6 years, and it creates a thoughtful mechanism for evaluating where we are. The other thing to think about is how many were here before the internet? Like, how many out there were before the internet? So NAFTA was actually negotiated before the commercial adoption of the internet, okay? And then USMCA, as a fundamental factor, really brought the technology up, and so it was an agreement negotiated in the 2016 timeframe. Now, think of where we are today and the advent of AI and what we're producing as a country in terms of exports. And it's also what our president talks a lot about is making AI in the United States the #1 exporter of technology and this digital expertise. And so just from a fundamental factor, that's another piece of, where these agreements hit in terms of of technology. So we have NAFTA occurred before we had the internet, then we had USMCA, and then where we are now with this review, we have lots to discuss, not the least of which is AI, but also the fact of, again, where it fits. We're now talking a lot about electric vehicles. We're in Tesla's backyard. And all of this technology that has been developed with batteries and EV components. And so it's the, I would say, the elegance of the deal that creates this 6-year review that enables us to then bring and think about these provisions that would need to be updated. But it's not a requirement. And so Ambassador Greer has spoken, I think you made the point, previously about a desire to that the president enjoys a bilateral negotiations, and it's fundamentally if we're trying to put the American worker first, having a one-on-one conversation and is a lot easier. I would say it's difficult, but maybe less difficult than having a 3-party agreement in order to maximize the benefit to the American worker. And so we can see that one of the scenarios could potentially be a bilateral, like a bilateral agreement with a trilateral framework. But again, it's the elegance of the original USMCA that created the opportunity for this review, which again, it allows us to update it and also to figure out where the gaps are and take into account this, the new technology and also where we are in terms of economic security and national security.
Thank you very much. And, and I want to focus on something you said, which is I believe you gave a figure of 700,000 jobs lost over, I assume, a 20 plus year period, right, from 1994 through. I want to bring this down to the Texas level. Outstanding national framework. And I want to talk to Larry about the aggregate, and then I want to talk to you, Caroline, about what you see in your district. But Larry, let's start with you. We've heard from Jill about the effects of the trade agreement on the United States writ large. What has it done to Texas?
That's a great question, Josh. Thank you. And Jill, I couldn't agree more with you. I do believe this time frame that President Trump set on the USMCA revision is a must. It's a must because things change, right? And today's reality is nothing like it was in 2016, and also governments change. Governments in Mexico change, governments in the U.S. change, and thus this revision is very important. For Texas in particular, Texas is the largest trading partner of Mexico, and thus Mexico, their largest trading partner is Texas. Just to give you an idea, the trade between Mexico and the U.S. is about almost $1 trillion. It's getting close to $1 trillion. A third of it is carried by one state, and that is Texas. So it's massive. And for Texas, the largest vendor and the largest client is Mexico. It's very interesting because when I was doing my master's at Rice, and yes, we don't have any elegant slogans.
It's a very sober
right?
school.
I guess we're owls, right? We just watch but interestingly enough is I don't think enough people understand the strategic importance of Mexico. In economic terms, in security terms, of course, we see it. But economically, a lot of people didn't. For example, in my MBA, I would ask around what they thought about trade with Mexico, and nobody really knew. And we're talking about, I guess, very intelligent folks, right, at the MBA. And nobody really knew that Mexico was not only Texas's largest trading partner, but the United States' largest trading partner. A lot of people assume maybe China or other countries. Some said Japan, which that was like 25 years ago, and so forth. But this is very important to note because we have, in a sense, a communication problem in communicating why this trade agreement is so important. And it is very important for Texans and for the Texas livelihood because we export to Mexico a lot of different types of products. Not only, I live in Houston, so not only is Mexico our largest trading partner in gas, we sell tons of gas to Mexico, but in livestock and many other products, Mexico is the largest trading partner. But at the same token, and you were pointing it out, Josh, our ports of entry in Texas are crucial for USMCA. So for Texans, it has to be a priority, I believe, the renegotiation of the USMCA, or the revision. I like to call it a renegotiation because things have changed so dramatically, not so much in the U.S. perspective and not so much in our way of life, but what has happened in Mexico, right? Mexico, when we were negotiating USMCA, was under a transition of one government to another. And the current government is very, very different from what it was like even when NAFTA got negotiated. So, for example, one of the key industries for us in Texas, of course, is energy. And the energy sector in Mexico has been decimated, the private energy sector. And that was a huge opportunity for Texan companies, not only in gas, but oil, but also in oil and extraction and so forth. And it's still a great opportunity. But of course, if you don't have the framework there to accompany investment that Texan companies can do, it's not worth the gamble, right? So that's part of the paradigm that we're living in. That paradigm of should we engage with Mexico more in economic terms? Because many times I see we tend to in Texas to leave that to the federal government, right? It's that's not our job, let Washington negotiate, let Washington do it, and certainly yes, because that's part of their role. But Texas is really at the center stage of it. So I really believe that Texas needs to have a very big voice over what happens with the USMCA, over those rails that we set for USMCA, and it can really benefit not only Texans as a whole, but also the growth of Texas small and medium businesses.
Thank you, Larry. Caroline, District 52 is such an interesting district, and it has this, so, for those of you who don't know, it's essentially North Austin suburbs and exurbs. It has a tremendous high-skilled migrant population, a lot of industry there, a lot of activity there, and I would say, I mean, tell me if you disagree with any of this, but it's uniquely sensitive to the trade economy. Is that a fair way to put it? So absolutely. What do you see? Sorry, I'll get it. What do you see of the effect of USMCA/NAFTA on the district? Harms, helps, and opportunities with the people that you represent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just start by, if you don't know, which most of you probably don't, I serve on the Transportation Committee in the House, and I also serve on the Trade, Workforce, and Economic Development Committee, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Workforce. So all of these things have a lot to do with trade and what we are doing in Texas to invest in, our roads and our economy and all of these things to make sure that we are the #1 partner in this agreement. And it's not just my district. I mean, we have Samsung in my district now, who is absolutely monumental to deals like this and the leverage that Texas does hold to be, a loud voice in these negotiations. But it's all across Texas. I've been in the Texas House for about 4 years now, 2 terms, running for my 3rd term. And if you look back over that time, we have made significant investments in our future. We are investing at any level that we would need to become, one of the top economies in the world. We are already the 8th largest economy in the world. Again, gives us a lot of leverage when it comes to these negotiations. And we're Texas. We're always wanting to be better and be the best. So we're probably going to be the 7th largest soon, but all of that plays into these negotiations, because if we didn't have businesses like Samsung, if we didn't have a strong industry, if we didn't have a strong economy, if we didn't have the amazing heartbeat of small businesses that we have here in Texas, the United States would be in a weaker position in negotiating in these trade deals, and I will also add just the national security element to this. We've spent billions in Texas to secure our border. Billions, because we will always secure the border. No matter what the federal government does, no matter what Mexico does, we will always do that. But I think that is a fair piece to add to these negotiations, that we have put so much into what Texas is today, and we're still, even with all that, we're still dealing with a lot of those negative effects of an open border, right? And so I think those are fair points to bring up. And we talk about water. We've invested billions in water. We've invested billions in our road. Laredo is the #1 inland port in the world, if you didn't know. And so we are investing money in those roads specifically to make sure that, that trade continues with Mexico. But I agree with you. I think, we look at it from an investment perspective, but, we always want to make sure that we can get Texans the best jobs possible. That plays a lot into the wage discussion, especially with Mexico and their manufacturing facilities. We want, Texas auto engines to be everywhere, So there's a lot that plays into it. And you're right, it is the federal government that will make these decisions. I love how you put it. We do have the best negotiator in chief, and I'm so grateful that is who we have leading, because they will make sure that we as Texas benefit from these deals, whether it's a renegotiation with the 3 or a separate negotiation between the 2. I mean, we have done such a good job in investing in our state and our jobs and our economy to be the leverage that the United States can point to and say, hey, we need to continue this success. So from the Texas perspective, from my district, I'm looking at this as going to be a win for us because of all we've invested up to this point. I really think that we will end up seeing, great benefit from whatever the terms end up being on the deal.
Super, thank you. Jill, I'm going to put you on the spot as the non-Texan up here. Nobody's perfect.
You've been talking to my sister, I bet.
Oh, does she live in Texas?
No, I'm just saying when you say nobody's perfect.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry.
She'll be the first to tell you.
Some family dynamics on display. But I think it's actually important that you have a national perspective on this, because you heard from Caroline, you heard from Larry, everything that the trade agreement, USMCA/NAFTA, has done for Texas, and full concurrence actually on all points. I think that's right. But that's not the view from a lot of the rest of the country. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the disparity between, say, how it's viewed in Texas, which we've all heard about, but then what you hear from, say, the Ohio River Valley, from the Great Lakes states, from other places that may not have a similarly rosy view, because that's real.
Yeah, I think I would just go back to the earlier point that I was talking about with the evolution of going from NAFTA to USMCA, and I was probably I was softer than what our at the time candidate Trump was running on, and talking about how bad of a deal that NAFTA was, and specifically you mentioned the Ohio River Valley. I did my undergraduate in that area, University of Dayton. And I interned at General Motors when that was one time in my life. I thought I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I'll say the world's a safer place because I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm not a mechanic. I did well in school, but But the point is, I'm leading to a conversation about automobiles. And so within NAFTA, you had rules of origin, which were 62.5%. NAFTA brought it up to 75%, and then you also had this concept that was introduced under, NAFTA and USMCA, and then you had this idea of labor value content, which really set a minimum floor for wages at $16 an hour, because up to that point, you really had a toothless trade agreement, and you had Mexico, potentially Canada could have done this, but that was arbitraging off of the value of labor. And so if the labor is subsidized or the labor is very cheap, then you have a country that is just able to produce at super low market rates and take advantage of that delta between 100% and 62.5%, and so produce cars at a lot cheaper. And so going to USMCA, I think it's an improvement, but for folks that are deep in the auto industry, they think we can do better. And I think that's something that, in my conversations with USTR, the United States Trade Representative's Office, it's something that I hear is that we can do better within the automobile industry. So that's one. And then secondly, I think overarching this is we have a fourth member to this trade agreement. And I think you know where I'm going, but the fourth member is China. And so this is such a critical point. And I know Congressman Arrington has introduced a bill that would put in CFIUS-type rules into the USMCA, or encourage those types of rules. Which really means that you have China that is coming into Mexico and purchasing or setting up manufacturing facilities as a way to get around tariff rules. And if we were, I would say, for lack of a better word, it really serves as kind of a laundering of our trade agreement, and that's not at all the spirit of the trade agreement, and one could even say that's not the letter of the trade agreement. And so this is something that is really a critical issue that needs to be resolved, and whether that is very strong enforcement mechanisms with disclosure of who actually owns these factories, and not enabling the China to get around the provisions of USMCA, but that plays in as such an important picture when we talk about different parts of the country actually this impacting it. China is really a critical piece of it.
Thank you. Larry, Jill has mentioned previously that there's one of the reasons that we have this reauthorization process with the USMCA is because there are new economic sectors that arise. So, in 2018, artificial intelligence was not really the thing that it is now, not the economic driver. And so reauthorization is a mechanism to incorporate those things into the agreement. Tell me if I'm mischaracterizing you, but I think that's exactly right. So I was a C student, so I need to restate things. But you know, talk. So 2 weeks ago, as you know, we had the privilege of being in Mexico City. We met with Marcelo Ebrard, who is the Secretary of the Economy in Mexico. Had a very good, frank conversation with him, and one of the two of the sectors that he mentioned in the context of reauthorization. I'm not making news here, by the way, so you know, don't. But you know, he mentioned you know, chips manufacturing. He mentioned artificial intelligence. All of these as economic sectors, supply chains, and so on that exist in the U.S. that it would be beneficial to Mexico to take part in. I think that's just objectively true on his end. But Larry, talk to me a little bit about what you see. You know, because you're truly binational. You live in both Mexico City and Houston, Texas, and so good weather to bad, essentially. You know, talk to us about what you see, not with the new sectors, but also the sectors which really are demanding, the pre-existing sectors that demand this kind of reauthorization conversation. And I'll put my cards on the table. I'm thinking specifically of energy and agriculture.
That's very true, and actually today the Mexican president just announced that finally they'll be looking at fracking, right? Which took them a long time because they had actually prohibited it, and
they're bringing the technology of 2012 to 2026.
Exactly.
Problems.
So it's getting there. It's getting there, a little but surely, and but finally it's a recognition that our Texan companies have proven once again that that's technology, right? And so energy is definitely an opportunity for Texas companies in Mexico. But another true opportunity that has been certainly missed is our incredible medical facilities that we have in Texas, right? It's just incredible what has been developed in obviously Houston, but also Dallas and here in Austin to some degree. So that is definitely an opportunity, and there's a lot to do there. At the end of the day, it's just critical for Mexico and the U.S. to have a very strong relationship. But it needs to be also a relationship, going back to Jill's point and also to your point, Caroline, it needs to be a relationship where Texas is first, right? And the benefits of this trade relationship continue growing Texas economy and growing Texas businesses. And to that effect, and I'm so glad you brought up China, because I had the distinct recognition that China criticized me publicly and on Twitter, on X.
Congratulations.
So did you change your handle to say CCP criticized? You should.
I should, right? And just because what you say is so critical, right? And they say I promote a narrative that is false. Of course, that's China saying it, right? So, but in reality, China, what China has done over the last decade basically is they've invaded Latin America. Mexico has been the last stop, but when you look at trade between Argentina and the world, it's China. Between Chile and the world, it's China. Between Brazil and the world, it's China leading the efforts. It's not the United States. Fortunately, Mexico, our southern our southern neighbor, does have the United States as the largest trading partner. But we have to maintain that power of being the most important trading partner. And yes, what happens is many of these companies, now they don't even come from China to Mexico. They come from Argentina to Mexico. So it's even more hidden in the paperwork. So it's very important to understand who we're trading with, and we make sure, because it has also decimated industries in Mexico. Textile industry used to be a huge industry in Mexico. Now it's been decimated by Chinese. So it's not only affecting the United States, it's affecting Mexico as well. And I think Marcelo, in the Secretary of Economy, in the conversations that you've had, that I've had, he understands that China is a risk, and it's a risk not only in the U.S.-Mexico relationship, but it is a risk for the Mexican industry. So that definitely needs to be accounted for, and we need to do a better job in being vigilant that our trading partner is not China, our trading partner is Mexico, and that the products that are brought into the States come from the Mexican manufacturing sites, from Mexican companies or from American companies. Of course, American companies have done very well in Mexico because our two countries in a perfect world, would really be would really have excellent synergies, and they do have a lot of synergies. There's also challenges, and definitely security is a huge challenge and a huge cost for American companies. I talk to American companies almost every day, and just in security costs alone, they have to account for about 8 to 9% of their revenue. So it's huge what they spend in security, just making sure that their products get to the United States and so forth. But still, with that, it's still an opportunity to invest in Mexico. But really, where I see also additional opportunities is in technology, right? And Texas has been leading that charge, and I'm so proud to see what we've done in attracting companies like Samsung and other companies around the world, investing just billions of dollars in our economy, and that will continue because we're still the greatest state in the union, right? So, sorry, Jill. I'm sorry.
I knew what I was going to into when I landed at the Austin airport. So.
but when you
Good. It's not going to end.
When you look at the amount of just investment from other states that is coming to Texas, it's incredible. And so not only is it what Texas can export, but also what Texas can bring in foreign investment. And that must be something that we should look at, right? Because we've been great in attracting huge companies, but we can do more in attracting companies from Latin America that are very big and that can come to Texas. They're doing it certainly because they see the great opportunities, but the more we can focus on it and attract more investment from foreign entities like Samsung and other companies, I think that can be a great opportunity for us as well, Josh.
Thank you, Larry. One of the perennial challenges in discussing the Texas-Mexico relationship and the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and it's a problem that is not in evidence on this stage, by the way, which pleases me because it means we picked the right people. But it is rife throughout the relevant policy community, is this idea that you can bifurcate the relationship into a security channel on one side and a trade and commerce channel on the other, and the two never really need meet, which at the foundation we've said for years is just completely false, that you've got to integrate the two. Caroline, I was really pleased to hear you make that linkage very explicitly. So just put our cards on the table. I'm not imputing this position to you. We have said and believed for years that the USMCA renegotiation should be an opportunity for the United States to extract security concessions from the Mexican government in particular. We already got what we wanted from the Canadians, which was a gold medal. But on Mexico, this is live cast somewhere, so somebody in Ottawa just like turned off the feed. But what we need to get, in our view, in the institutional view, is as I said, security concessions. More effective border controls, more effective intelligence cooperation, more effective liaison between law enforcement, military, you name it. Since you mentioned it, I'm going to put you on the spot. What are your thoughts on all that? Is that an opportunity for it? And what can Texas do to, if you endorse that, what can Texas do to make sure that happens?
Absolutely. I really think it's reasonable given the billions that we have invested in our border. And, it's not just the billions we've invested in our border, it's also all the money that we spend on the consequences of an open border. I mean, we every day, we still spend money trying to figure out the consequences of that open border. And I don't know, I like to remind people, the open border, we have an amazing new president. He has closed the border, and we are so grateful for that. But there are long-term effects from having an open border, and we deal with that in Texas every single day. And so I bring that up as just another piece to this, security conversation. And then I also wanted to go back to AI a little bit and, the conversation about China, because I was around in the 90s. I was born in the 90s. But I think AI will be a huge piece of the conversation because of how much it's advanced in the last couple of years. And one of the greatest examples, I'm just going to brag about the United States and our military real quick. They used a tool with AI to find the pilot on the mountain when they went and rescued him, to detect his heartbeat using AI. Just fascinating stuff. So we really, we are getting into an incredible national security situation with AI, and who is trying to outrace us? China. They are working on this every day trying to make sure that they can get ahead of the United States on this. And so you're seeing that in some of the, relationships that they do have in Latin America, that they do have with Canada. And so in Texas, we do have such an amazing technology infrastructure here that we will be playing a big part in that AI conversation. But I think in the negotiations, it would be great if we could see some teeth like you were talking about, just some guarantees that it won't be China pushing this from those other countries and in those other hidden ways, that Texas will be able to benefit from whatever is in that deal when it comes specifically to AI and technology. I mean, we've done, even this past session, we've done a lot to protect ourselves from Chinese influence, banning China, Chinese citizens from owning land in Texas. That goes to, any foreign hostile government to Texas, not just China. But there's a lot that we work on. I have filed legislation to look at what critical pieces of our infrastructure in energy we are getting from countries like China and other hostile foreign nations to, again, try to bring that back to the United States instead of these countries that, are a real threat to the United States and to Texas. So it's even more broad than just Mexico and what's going on there. But you bring up a good point, because we need security. We need a secure environment for that investment to come. That's what businesses look for. They're looking for, whether it's regulation, in a steady regulatory environment, a steady trade environment, whatever it is, that's what they look for, is stability. And so I think it's absolutely reasonable that the security piece of it is in that conversation, especially given what you talked about, the changes in the Mexican government over the years and what things look like now. So, yeah, I really do think it's reasonable, not just from, the perspective of Mexico, but just the broader conversation of national security and, the fourth trading partner in China.
And if I could inject just one more thought on what Caroline was pointing out, Josh, on this point. It definitely, there needs to be an agreement with Mexico, a very strict agreement on security. I'm not sure if it's feasible to get it done through the USMCA on time and with all, because at the end of the day, it's being negotiated by a trade representative, not by a security or a DHS or. So, but this needs to be an opportunity or the revision of the USMCA to set up framework to have a very strict security agreement with Mexico and with KPIs, just like what companies do, right? With KPIs and what happens if you don't reach this KPI, how are we going to deal with this, and constant revisions, just like the USMCA. But the security aspect of it is so big that it would probably be like 20 more chapters into the USMCA alone, right? So, because it not only has to do with drug trafficking, it has to do with human trafficking, it has to do with border security, it has to do with, obviously, drugs, and it has to do with, we're talking about these enterprises. It's just incredible when you look at the amount of the size of them. They're $40 to $60 billion enterprises. So obviously they have enough money to pay off a lot of different people in different countries, including the United States. That's how they get their products in here and really putting our children at risk, because they have that money to and their networks, right? When Mencho fell, it was impressive. I was in Houston, and about 3 or 4 days. This Mencho was one of the drug lords, one of the largest drug lords in Mexico, and one of the deadliest, something like Pablo Escobar in the 80s and 90s in Colombia. And when he fell, the Houston leader who controlled this market also fell. So that just goes to show that these networks that they've created are immersed in our U.S. economy, in our U.S. culture, in our U.S. System, unfortunately. So it's a very hard issue to tackle, and that's why I think we also need a parallel security agreement with Mexico.
I don't want to turn this into a U.S.-Mexico security panel, although that would be extremely interesting. But it is part of the trade conversation, honestly. And so I guess a question for the audience to ask themselves is, and for us to ask ourselves, and we genuinely don't know the answer, is how do we preserve the leverage that we have vis-a-vis the trade negotiation that goes into that security conversation? Jill, I want to ask you, though, Jameson Greer's got enough on his mind. From your perch in Washington, D.C., have you seen any evidence that there's any kind of security linkage at all, or is the Trump administration really pursuing these as two separate tracks?
Well, I think it's. I would just ask the question, like, where does national security end and economic security kind of pick up? And I think
Interstate 10.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Go ahead. So, yeah. Sorry.
But I did get that. So, but I think the agreement that we're talking about is really an agreement about North American economic sovereignty and security. And so I think they're linked, and I just don't see that you can unlink them. And so while, you know, we made the point about China, one could say it's an economic point when we're talking about disclosure and transparency around ownership, the elimination of transshipments, again, which would enable China to get around the provisions of USMCA, or Mexico get around the provisions of USMCA and get into the United States tariff-free. Those are, you know, one would say provisions of a trade deal, but they're actually, I would say, provisions of economic security and national security. And so I just think they're linked. I did want to make the point, I will rarely predict things, but this one I will predict. And that is the USMCA passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It had 389 votes in the House, 89 votes in the Senate. And it was fundamentally a bipartisan trade agreement with this provision that we're talking about right now, the review provision every 6 years, a critical component of it. My prediction is I would encourage you to watch the conversation that's going to be happening as we march to the July date and see whether members of Congress remember that it was bipartisan, or whether this becomes a, what is Trump doing with this? Why doesn't he, you know, this is, and just a critique of the president. Because what Congress voted back in 2016, when they voted on this, they voted for this exact provision to ensure that American workers are put forth. So this was the exact thing that they voted for, and it was overwhelmingly bipartisan. And so I think it's really important to hold our members accountable to say, this is what you voted for, both sides, all aisles, and that's a key component. And then just a third quick point that I'd like to mention, we brought up foreign direct investment. And so there's some academic journals that look at, you know, what does the foreign direct investment lead to in job creation? And the studies have shown that, you know, about $1 billion leads to about 6,000 jobs. And so the foreign direct investment around USMCA has been, you know, maybe 400, 500 billion over the course of time. And what we're talking about is that translating to, you know, well over 1 million to 3 million jobs, so long as they're, you know, they're investing in not just buying them, you know, they're investing in actually the creation of facilities. And so what this, and where I'm going with this, is how USMCA can actually lead to more work for Caroline. And so what this is, the point is that when we have a negotiator-in-chief, and the bipartisan Congress has created this review mechanism, and our negotiator-in-chief negotiates more and negotiates better deals, putting the American worker first, which would mean, as you mentioned, more foreign direct investment. Even if we were to get, just right out of the bat, $100 billion of foreign direct investment, that's 600,000 jobs. That translates then, what we will be talking about next year is, what are we going to do with all these jobs in training the American workers? And that's where it leads to one of the committees that you serve on. And those are great conversations to have. And so that is my hope, is that when our president does negotiate this, we will then start having those conversations about making sure American workers are trained for the jobs that these investments will come.
Thank you. And you know, that's such an excellent point on the partisanship aspect of it, which is an inevitable feature of our politics. But I do look forward to the July debates, and Jasmine Crockett asking why the USMCA renegotiation does not reopen the Straits of Hormuz. So now it's on that note, on that very serious note, we are now going to go to question and answer. But before we do, would you please give a round of applause to our panelists who've done such a great job? Thank you. All of them, you'll be first, sir. All of them, so let's get a microphone to this gentleman over here. All of them are experts in their field. We're grateful for their time. We have 20 minutes for Q&A. My only request for you all with the Q&A is ask a question. And if you have a longer monologue to give, do it in the hall. All right? Thank you. I'm sorry. I guess you're first. You'll be second, sir. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for having me. So my name is Eros, I'm from France. If you don't understand my accent, I'm so sorry. I don't have the subtitles in real life. But we talked about technology, AI, and I'm very passionate about this. So my question would be, sorry, I lost it. And it's a very complicated one with a lot of words, so you know. So is Texas positioning itself to be a pioneer by integrating these technologies, so blockchain, AI, because we know that blockchain is used in a lot of industries, into the USMCA framework to lead the future of North American trade?
Yes, so I would just say even this past session, we did make a lot of investments and pass laws around blockchain, around these other types of technologies, even emerging technologies, to make sure that we are in those conversations, that, you know, we're at the beginning of the conversation. You know, if you didn't know, I think most of you probably do, but in the Texas legislature, we meet every other year for 140 days. And so we have to make sure that in those 140 days, we are at the beginning, we are making sure that we are at the beginning of all these conversations, you know, regardless of where the technology is at. But yes, we do need to make sure that we're in that conversation and make sure that in these deals, you know, we are considered because we have made those investments. And I'll go back to the workforce. You know, we have made significant investments in workforce training. I've got a Texas State Technical College campus in my district. One of my younger brothers is a welder, graduated from there, has a great job, but that's what we want to see more of. And we also, this past session, have changed even how our high schoolers think about those jobs. We have opportunities now that they can get certifications in some of these trade jobs so that they can get a job even right out of high school. So those are things that we are working on that I think will just even add to the conversation that, hey, we're ready, you know, bring it on. We're happy to take on more work. But
Thank you so much. And by the way, I was remiss. I was supposed to introduce Mr. Brisson. So Eros Brisson, am I getting that right? Yes, thank you. Here's our influencer here, all the way from France. Where in France are you
I've
from?
seen all your videos. So.
At the Spanish and French border.
Oh, perfect. You're almost to paradise. That's great. Very good. Yeah. Good. Welcome. Thank you, and thank you very much for coming all this way. We really appreciate it. So we have you, sir, and then we have Rado in the back. We have Enrique in the front. We've got a couple more, so go ahead.
Yeah, when you think about the cartels and the impact that they are having in business and trade, I think it's about specifically for agriculture. Currently, we have the New World Screwworm, has the Mexican-U.S. border closed, and the cartels are taking advantage of that, actually opening meat packing facilities to be able to buy and sell boxed beef. And so they're very motivated to ensure that that border stays closed. They've also started to get involved in all sorts of agriculture because it's a great way to be able to launder money. So when you think about the USMCA as it relates to the cartels, it's almost like there's a fifth person in this besides the four, and it is the cartels. And so how do we deal with that from a U.S. policy perspective beyond just the security aspect, because it does have such negative impacts from a business standpoint?
And I want to yield also to you, Jill, but because that's why I do believe that we have to have a very strict enforced security agreement. Be it if it can be put inside the USMCA, that'd be great. But if it cannot, it needs to be done, and it needs to be done urgently because we have those types of situations. And not only do you have it as you said in meat, but you also have it in avocado, right? Exactly. And what they're doing is now they're becoming big business owners, right? And people have to give their businesses to these narco terrorists because if not, they get killed, right? So there's no question about how they're growing their businesses, and they're trying to launder money that way, and also have new routes for drugs and so forth. So it's a huge problem that we can definitely not ignore.
I would just so I'm can't speak to, I'm not an expert on Mexican cartels at all, but just what you're describing, in my view, has to do, just as you had said, the enforcement mechanism. And so within USMCA, you have this rapid response mechanism that enables in a much quicker fashion when the United States determines that a factory is not paying a wage floor, it can put this mechanism into place, and that they would no longer, or they would be tariffed on those goods. And so I think like the bigger picture, what you're bringing to light is more about, I think, strengthening the enforcement mechanism would be how I would think about that. And I think I just go back to, disclosure, transparency, and strengthening the enforcement mechanism.
Real quick, Josh, I just want to point out, Nate, would you wave this is Nate Sheets, our Republican candidate for Agriculture Commissioner of Texas. I just wanted to point that out. You guys need to get to know him. Anyway, keep going.
No, it's quite all right. And actually, sir, I'd like to talk to you later on about how we're working on that. So, question in the back, Radomir?
Yeah.
Oh, nope, you're not Radomir. Okay, go ahead, sir. George Pond, go ahead.
Okay.
It's all right.
Back in the late 80s, Ross Perot and the first Bush, George H. Bush, were running for president, and obviously the NAFTA issue was big. Remember, if y'all, I don't know how old everybody is here, but Ross Perot used the big sucking sound. Okay?
I went to Ross Perot rallies, so.
So here's my question. Lessons learned. What have we learned from NAFTA and the effects of it, the positive and the negatives, and how are they going to be applied to the current agreements that we're working on that benefit America? That's my question.
Man, that's a good question. Jill, I want you to take that one. Yeah.
So I think in my remarks, I spoke a lot about NAFTA, and that's the trade provision that, the President Trump didn't make a sucking sound, but he ran against NAFTA. And so just a couple of points. I think that's, number one, why USMCA was created. It was the opportunity, what President Trump ran on. He then negotiated the framework and negotiated USMCA, and so that's why we had USMCA to begin with. And then big picture, NAFTA was about free trade, and what I'm talking about, what we're talking about is really fair trade. So fair trade with trading partners and not trading adversaries. And when NAFTA was put into place, it was liberalizing trade without having and harmonizing this, the underlying enforcement provisions. And so you had lower rules of origin, you had no labor content value and wage floors. So you really just free up trade and create opportunities for companies to arbitrage the cost of labor in whatever they produce. And you also create incentives for our trading adversaries to exploit that and to come in the back door through these countries. And so I wouldn't consider NAFTA a first step at all. I would consider USMCA as really correcting for what NAFTA had failed to do. And then I think within USMCA, we have this review, which again, I think is a very thoughtful provision that again, bipartisan members of Congress voted for, that can, I think, shore up these weaknesses or shore up the gaps. And so I would just kind of characterize it as, it's enforcing what needs to be enforced. That's what I'm hoping for with the review, enforcing what needs to be enforced and closing the gaps. And then thirdly is deepening what's working. So let's deepen what's working. Let's strengthen our North American economic sovereignty. Let's close the gaps, address China, and modernize, which is what we're talking about with AI and rules of origin, et cetera.
Let me add one thing that we should have learned is that the purpose of a nation is not just to be an economic zone, really. Rado, go ahead. Next question.
No, in the back.
He's got my haircut, so
So sorry.
it's all right.
Thanks so much. That was a tremendous panel. I'm Radomir Talko, a friend from England. I'll start with a question, and then, if I may, Joshua, the briefest monologue by way of explanation.
Keep it short.
So brief. So, should the United Kingdom join the USMCA, and would that be in the Texan interest in particular? The monologue bit is that I was lucky enough to have been a special advisor in the Brexit government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and this agenda of UK accession actually has a surprising number of fans, of advocates across the Atlantic. So, one to discuss. Thanks again.
Thank you. I've got an answer, but do any of you have one? Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
And Rod and I were talking about it yesterday actually, and there is a provision within USMCA that would permit countries like the UK to join USMCA, and I'm not sure what we would call the agreement, but US-UK-MCA or something, but I think it's definitely there could be interest there that that could benefit Texas and could benefit the U.S. Not sure what y'all think.
Yes, we would love to, but keep going.
Go ahead, Jill. Go ahead. You first.
I would just kind of ask the question, like, to what end? I think it's hard enough to have a three-party and then to have a four-party. And I think if it's showing an allegiance to, the three, is it necessary to negotiate a complicated four-party agreement? And can we not negotiate the strongest and, like the best, like make UK and US trade great again, like the strongest trade agreement with our countries rather than a four-party agreement? And so that would be something that I'd want to understand, and it might be simpler or to just have a stronger bilateral agreement.
Trade and treaties work best when they are with nations that have like values and like heritage, and I think the U.S. and UK absolutely qualify. Emily, Enrique, please.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In 2005, President Bush in Waco, Texas, and President Fox, they signed the Security and Prosperity Partnership, the ASPAN. And it was part of this frame, and afterwards we got the Merida Initiative, and a lot of money, less than 1.5 billion went to Mexico to strengthen institutional rule of law. And there is challenges in infrastructure, challenges in security. Why not building the whole framework, and how do you suggest that's supposed to be? Because it is not just free trade, it is fair trade, but that comes with something else.
Who wants that? Larry? Now, Larry, you are his boss, so it's
So it's a little bit
I feel like there's a conflict.
That's why I was letting Jill.
You better hope he doesn't. You better hope he doesn't say you're wrong.
Larry, we were talking exactly about that question moments ago. I think you should handle it.
But along that line, it is true that policy has been developed already between our two countries, because we have obviously a relationship that spans hundreds of years. But SPP, as you pointed out, and I agree wholeheartedly, is an agreement that was signed by the former presidents, focused on security and fair trade, and unfortunately, with the nick of time, it just got buried, and then Obama decided it was no longer valid, and then with Joe Biden, unfortunately, one of the other things that happened was security did not become an issue in the agenda of the United States, right? Security with Mexico, and so thus that's when all the unraveling happened, because Mexico went the wrong way on how to tackle these criminal cartels. To this date, they don't call these cartels what they should, like Texas and the United States calls them, narco-terrorist organizations. They're foreign terrorist organizations because that's what they are. And that's when you start asking, why don't they call them what they are? They're killing Mexicans. So what are they, right? They're not just narco. They're terrorist organizations. So.
Next question, ma'am, right behind Enrique. Go ahead.
Thank you.
No, for clarity, you do not work for anybody on stage. So, okay, go ahead.
No, I do not. Thank you very much. This is very insightful. I was born and raised in Mexico City, but my question is to the two of you. And the first question is, you know, I understand that we need trade and that it's amazing that Texas has a relationship with Mexico, but my question is when we talk about foreign companies in Mexico specifically coming into the U.S., I know that, have you seen a drastic change in just the rhetoric or just the policies in place today under this administration? And I'm pro-Trump, but my concern is a lot of times what I hear is the rhetoric about, well, the U.S. doesn't want those Mexican companies here. And it's the furthest from the truth, but has immigration policy affected that at all?
So I just want to make sure that so when you talk about Mexican companies coming, is that what you're talking about, foreign direct?
Mexican investors that want to come in, and
Yeah.
that's part of the trade because, I mean, they want to come in and thrive in this country.
Yeah, and I think what you may have observed as the president, as part of the bilateral trade negotiations and trade frameworks that he's having with all these different countries, a key component is he's not just talking about tariffs. A key component is foreign direct investment, and so I think there is you see the president negotiating key components of these deals as foreign direct investments. And that actually on his Asia trip, he flew to Asia and he came home with $2 trillion worth of commitments from his Asia trip to invest in the United States. And so I think, and then the question is now, how do you quantify that? Like, who gets credit? How does this work? And I think that's all being figured out. And so in my view, I think the message to those who are wanting to come to the United States to invest, and I would call it greenfield investment, so to invest in a building like Samsung in your district, so building a factory, investing in career and technical education for the workforce and training American workers and hiring American workers, I think it's open for business, doors wide open. And I think that I would describe is different from conversations about immigration. And so I'm outside my policy lane talking about immigration, but what we're just to be very specific is we're talking about foreign direct investment, and I think if the president wasn't advocating and supporting that, then that wouldn't have been a key component of all these trade deals that he's been negotiating. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Well, I'm former ICE, so my question is,
Oh.
you've got to stick that safety to the economy.
Well, 100%, and we need ICE fully funded, and I'm confident that Congress is going to get it done, whether that's through reconciliation or a standalone bill. So it's critical agency.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead, and then we got to
Okay,
speed on.
Great.
Yeah.
And just added to your question, Luisa, I also believe that obviously immigration is a key factor because you're having investors coming into Texas and the United States, and they need to operate their plants. It's been interesting, and most people don't realize, but Mexico is the 7th largest foreign direct investor in our country. So it's a huge investor, right? For example, the cement company, they're one of the largest companies in Mexico and in the world. They're the 2nd or 3rd largest cement company out of Monterrey. Their largest operations are in the United States. So they're selling more in the United States. They're based out of Houston, out of the energy corridor. So that's an example of a truly Mexican company coming into the States.
Final 2 questions, ma'am, and then you, sir, in the corner right there. All right.
Yeah, thank you all. This has been so interesting. Even that stuff we did yesterday,
Thank you.
illuminating. And my question, you mentioned CFIUS earlier, and I imagine that they were intended to be a very strategic part of investment in this country. And I wasn't at the table, and I don't think I'm saying anything that isn't publicly known and verified, but it was my understanding that the general that bought the property on the border of this state did so surreptitiously through somebody else, but with the CFIUS approval on a Saturday night when only 3 people were available to vote on it. And that was on purpose, and I won't go into those details, but if that is true, shouldn't we consider with the seriousness now of what is being put on CFIUS that certain guidelines or protocols are put in place that have to approve their approval or review it or something, because so much has already taken place. Second question is there a clawback? Is there a clawback provision? If you find out that this has happened, then the United States gets your property. And also, as long as Mexico is, if true, now taking over private property and bank accounts at their own, then shouldn't that be addressed if we're going to do business with a country that's doing that?
Jill, do you want to talk about that?
So I just can't speak to that. I'm not familiar with that particular situation that you're describing of CFIUS and reviewing. But for me, describing CFIUS is like the CFIUS process where it's a review panel that looks at the underlying ownership structure, and if we describe that as a framework, Congressman Arrington's bill is to take that framework and apply it to two foreign companies in Mexico, so that the United States has visibility into its ownership structure vis-a-vis whether it's with a Chinese adversary or actually a Mexican investors. And so that to me is a, like, when I say a critical piece, I don't mean that this CFIUS bill is critical. What I mean is just the transparency to know whether or not we are doing business with China or whether we're doing business with Mexico. Like, that's critical. How we get there, I'm confident, whether it's with a CFIUS provision or some other framework, they're thinking about that. It's so important. And then we go back to your concern, which is it's about enforcement. And so if you're not adhering to the rules of this agreement, then there's tariffs. And so I'm fully supportive of getting those penalties right, because that's something that also is going to be addressed, because while the enforcement mechanisms in USMCA was a giant leap beyond what little NAFTA frameworks that they had, I still think there's opportunities to land that in a much more aggressive way.
Thank you. And I want to get one last question in. Sir, you're it, and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yesterday we heard from Mexican Senator Lili Tellez, I believe.
Lili Tellez, yes, sir.
Who testified essentially that the Mexican government is not separate from the cartels. They're part of them. Essentially a narco government, perhaps heading in the same direction as Venezuela under Maduro. So are we overlooking some problems that maybe are inconvenient or incompatible? The reason I raise this is when China acceded to the World Trade Organization, we thought this was great. And in retrospect, there are a lot of observers who say a market trade agreement is incompatible with a non-market economy, which has been exporting its manufacturing overcapacity to countries around the world. So are we just blinding ourselves to the possibility that a narco government is not compatible with American trade?
I'll take this one if that's all right. So this is at the core of my work, sir, and so if you have another hour, please sit down. And you didn't need to hear the Secretary of Agriculture speak. Don't tell her I said that. Mexico, so first of all, I broadly agree with the Senator's thesis. Lili Tellez is an exceptionally brave woman, and the fact that she came and spoke publicly here speaks tremendously to her credit. The current Mexican regime under the Morena party, I'll have to give you a very short answer, but happy to talk more about this, has a decades-long affiliation with organized crime, and especially with the Sinaloa cartel. And there's credible reporting, which I credit from a variety of sources, including the U.S. Department of Justice, that states that they have been recipients of cartel funds for almost a generation, and so they have brought that issue and that relationship into government. There are some reasonable disputations as to whether or not President Claudia Sheinbaum is part of the problem or part of the solution. I think what is indisputable is that, and just to be clear, since this is being live streamed on the public record, there's no credible evidence that Claudia Sheinbaum is in receipt of cartel funds, but it's indisputable from the public record that she has acted to protect those who are. And I totally believe, and this is what the foundation's talked about, this is what my work has talked about a lot, that we need to unpeel that in some way, and that recipients of cartel money, partners in cartel activities should not be benefiting from trade with the United States, and certainly not with the state of Texas. So happy to talk more about that. Thank you all. Please, again, give us a hand for the, not me, but give them a hand for it.